Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by a regular guest over the years, Doug Johnstone. Hello, Doug.
Hi Alistair, how you doing?
I'm really well. I'm really well. And we're talking to you because you are celebrating 20 books over 20 years, which is quite a record.
Yeah, I know, I don't look old enough, eh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do, but you don't. And we're going to talk about each one in a moment. But just reflecting on 20 years as a published writer, how does that feel? Is it odd?
Yeah, it's very strange actually. I still feel like a young whippersnapper trying to sort of break into getting books published in one sense. I'm not, anyone who knows me knows that I'm not nostalgic. I don't have a nostalgic bone in my body. I'm not about looking back ever. I'm always about the next thing, which is one of the ways that you manage to write 20 books in 20 years, I think, is always looking forward. So this whole process, a couple of my first two books have been reissued this year, and it's been quite strange to go back and just look at that perspective. But it's interesting, it's fun. And one of the things you notice is how much my writing has changed. I'm not sure that readers necessarily notice, but I think I mean, it's always inevitable that you notice yourself exactly how things have changed so much more, I think.
And as you mentioned, the first two novels, Tombstoning and The Ossians, are being republished. And that in itself, returning to them, did you tinker at all with them? How was the process of republishing them?
No, I didn't tinker with them. I mean, there's different approaches to that. I've known authors who have had reissued stuff where they've just left it, and I've known other ones where they've gone back in, with an editing pen and sort of made changes and stuff. I definitely was in favor of doing nothing because partly because it's if I started to edit them, I don't know where I would stop. Because I mean, the book I wrote last year, Ali, like I can't. All I could see is the mistakes.
Right.
So a book I wrote 20 years ago is like that, like 100 times, hundredfold. So I mean, I would just write it completely differently now because I'm a completely different person. I'm
Yeah.
older and not necessarily wiser, and I've got all sorts of other things going on. So I just wanted to leave it as a document of like that's what it was when it came out. Obviously I went back to read them just for interest's sake, which was a really strange, again, a really, really weird experience. Like if I'm writing an old novel and write a first draft and then go back and look at it, reading that second draft, sort of editing it, is like it's a combination of mostly you're sitting there thinking, who wrote this absolute crap? This needs fixed. But occasionally there's glimpses of, oh, that was quite smart. Like,
Mhm.
oh, like Doug 6 months ago was actually quite clever doing that, or there's a few little glimmers of that. And so this was like that again, just multiplied by 100. So I'm constantly reading, going like, oh, I would do that differently. I would do that differently. But also occasionally thinking, oh yeah, oh, that makes sense, and oh, that was quite smart, and I could see what I was trying to do there, all that sort of stuff. So it was a really weird experience, but it was fun. It was fun at the same time.
And do you recognise the Doug from the debut novel, for instance?
Well, I do a bit. I didn't think I would, but I do. I kind of yeah. What's interesting is that the first books, the first one, Tombstone, is out now, and it got a really so loads of really nice reviews again from like book bloggers mostly and stuff like that, who are very generous about it in a way that I think I probably am not. As much. But they were saying, oh, you can see some of the themes and some of the ideas and things that Doug, went on to write about. And actually, that's true. You can see a lot of the,
Right.
I mean, there's a sort of embryonic version of a lot of the same kind of subject matter and the way that characters act and react and talk. And things like the settings and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of that is stuff that I've just built on over the years, I think. Yeah. So I do recognize him a little bit.
Can you remember how you approached a debut novel? Did you know it was going to be published, for instance, or did you write it and then send it out?
I didn't know it was going to be published. I actually, so the two books, I've got them both here, little visual
Yep.
aids, like the republished ones, woohoo.
Yep.
But I actually wrote the Ossians first. I wrote a
All
version of the
right.
Ossians first, because I was in bands, and it was the age-old thing of like, I didn't see the world that I knew around me depicted in the fiction, the Scottish fiction that I was reading. And so I just was writing about my own experiences. It's about a band that toured the Highlands. And didn't really. I mean, it was terrible, that first version, but I mean it got rejected by everyone, which is fair enough. And I went on to write Tombstoning, And I'd had no idea that these were going to get published. This was kind of even before. I mean, I didn't have an agent or a book deal or anything like that. And I was just kind of writing into the abyss really a little bit
Yeah.
with that Ossians thing. But then a couple of editors gave me really positive feedback saying it's not quite right or not quite there, but let me see anything that you're doing, like, after this, which was enough of a kick up the arse to start on Tombstoning. And I just wanted to, I mean, part of you, I think, as a young writer is like you want to it sounds weird, but you wanted like destroy everything that went before. I chatted to Ian Banks about this once because I'm a journalist as well. I interviewed him, and he was lovely. He was said, I mean, Alistair Gray was his hero,
Yeah.
and he was said, I want to write a book like Lanark, but I also want to just say fuck it, and I'm going to write something that's going to make Lanark look stupid. And like, and I guess the Wasp Factory does that, It's like, but part of you wants to destroy your heroes, or like wants you can do bring something new to it. And I definitely had a little bit of that vibe. I think when I started writing, that I was like, oh, these guys don't know fucking anything. I'm gonna show them. And it's like, well, okay, maybe not.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I've got earlier copies of both of them here as visual aids.
Wow.
And I remember, I think I spoke to you before about how the Ossians was the first one you wrote. And what I remember when I read it was there hadn't really been a book looking at kind of smaller bands touring, the kind of life on the road that is depicted in this. It's a really, it's full of sticky carpets and no getting paid and, sleeping in vans and stuff.
Yeah.
So
It's
was
a,
that the kind of right what you know? Was that the kind of thing
yeah.
that you wanted to do?
It's kind of weird. That acts as a kind of it's like a time capsule now because I'm not sure that really a lot of those venues don't exist. The
Yeah,
live music circuit is like a lot harder. I mean, this is I mean, the whole book is written pre-streaming really and pre-social media. So they were literally in the back of a van, bumping around the roads like, to Ullapool and Wick and stuff like that and just playing to people. And I think it's really fascinating because yeah, I did know that world quite well. I mean, it wasn't quite at the stage that the Aussies were at, but I was in bands all the time.
yeah,
And I just thought it was a really fascinating world where, for every Coldplay or Snow Patrol that comes out of that thing, like there's 1,000 bands that don't make it. And I was really interested in that. Like, why do people do it? Why did I do it for so long? What do you get out of it? Does it matter if you're successful? All of these kind of things are really fascinating. I did an event with Toby Litz, because we both had books about bands that came out at the same time.
right.
In fact, I did a whole bunch of events with him because we were both published by Penguin, and his was about a kind of classic rock band who get famous and then they fall from grace. And he was saying like we all really love like success stories, don't we? And I was like, no, I don't. I like failure stories. That I'm really
Yeah.
interested in what people do when that doesn't work out. So that was always good for a laugh.
And it's it's quite interesting. I was speaking to Callum McSorley recently on the podcast, and both these books were really inspirational to him. And I think that idea of writing about things which perhaps hadn't been written about before and doing it in a way that wasn't done before, or at least in a different way, I think, in terms of they are thrillers and they hint, as you say, at what's to maybe come next. But with the subject matter, it was quite different.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Tombstoning was inspired by sort of Friends Reunited and school reunions, and it's about going back to Arbroath where I grew up. But they're kind of, I mean, I don't know, they're slightly sort of countercultural or subversive
Yeah,
books a little bit. I mean, they're kind of like under the radar. They're not about ordinary people. I mean, Tombstoning is absolutely soaked in booze. That's one of the things I noticed reading back on it. I was like, Jesus Christ, these people are drinking so much. And the Aussians is absolutely awash with drugs and violence,
yeah,
like properly. And I think I was definitely trying to push the boat out on both those things. But they're also both funny. I think they're
yeah,
both
they
quite
are.
funny books. The Aussians especially is like ridiculous. They turn up in Ullapool and there's a submarine full of Russian submariners, like all getting steaming and shooting off guns in the street. So it's like there's an element of like making it kind of farcical as well. And Callum McSorley's been incredibly kind about the Aussies. He got in touch with me when he saw it was coming out. He said, "Oh, if you want to do anything, I'd love to talk about it." So I mean, it's interesting. I suppose you can see a little bit of that kind of irreverence in Callum's in prose as well in his books that they kind of just don't give a fuck, which
Yeah,
is refreshing about them.
no, absolutely. And we were talking about it, and just out of nowhere, we both went, seagulls! And just the cull of the seagulls. It's such a
Oh,
strong scene for those who don't know. We couldn't remember where it happened.
it's Aberdeen. It's the pier at Aberdeen, which you can't drive out anymore. I don't know if they blocked it off because of that scene, but like I used to read that, Ali. I used to read that scene at book events, and like God, I thought people would pass out sometimes. It's not the bit I won't really explain, but like they accidentally drive over hundreds of seagulls, but the only way to get out is to drive back over them. So that's the worst bit when they realise they have to do it again.
I,
Uh,
I, I think it's a scene that's really kind of stuck with people, absolutely, definitely. But you mentioned how Tombstoning is soaked in booze, and that kind of brings me to the next one, which is Smokeheads,
oh yeah.
which is kind of, I think, where I first, I mean, I'd read the Ossians and then I went back to read Tombstoning, but this I remember when it first came out and getting a copy when it first came out, and I was just kind of getting into my smoky whiskies at the time as
Oh
well.
yeah.
And so this was perfect reading for me. Tell us a little bit about Smokeheads.
Yeah, so Smokeheads it felt like a distinct, it was a definitely a departure from the first two books. It was a
Yeah.
new publisher. I actually wrote a third book in between the Ossians and Smokeheads, which never got published. And it was very different. I learned a lot from that experience. But as a result of that, I just thought, I mean, it took me ages. It was a big sprawling book, and I thought, fuck it, I just want to write the shortest, nastiest, funniest, like little thriller I could think of. So it's basically four guys go to Isla, and one of them wants to set up a distillery, and bad things happen. Basically, it's whiskey galore meets deliverance as well as my pitch, which is pretty accurate actually. It's more, do you know, it's more like you know the movie Sideways.
Yes, absolutely. I love Sideways. Yeah.
It's sideways except with whiskey meets deliverance because I mean there's a real love of whiskey in the book, but also there's like a really nasty sort of deliverance style thriller going on. There's bad cops on the island and they uncover all sorts of shit and it just goes like, you know, from bad to worse. But I really I mean it's a much shorter book and it's snappier and it absolutely cuts to the chase really quickly. I feel like I kind of definitely was finding my voice by this point that it was, what's weird is it was so easy to write. Like, you know, books shouldn't be easy to write. So I think, I mean, they should be hard, and I struggled very like a lot with the first two books, but Smokeheads just kind of fell out of me almost like 60,000 words bang, and it was there, and it, you know, I got like, you know, offers from different publishers almost straight away. So it was obviously tapping into something. And I just like, I mean, the whole whiskey world is, I mean, you know, it's not, you're not reinventing anything. There's been books about whiskey and there's books about whiskey now, like, you know, Natalie Jane Clark's great book about the
Yeah.
whiskey murders and stuff. So it's a rich vein for it though, because I mean, you can look at all aspects of the tourism industry, the whole whiskey industry, how it, you can look at things like local people and how they appreciate the money coming in, but also resent, you know, the sort of outsiders and all that sort of stuff and the big corporations. And so you can look at all that, but at the same time, you know, there's people sitting in a pub getting pissed, arguing about whiskey, and then, you know, crashing their car and falling off a cliff and all sorts of other stuff. So it gives you a good excuse. And actually, it was the first I really loved. I mean, it was kind of following on from the Austins in one sense because it was all mostly all set in Islay,
Yeah.
which is an incredible, you know, beautiful place. And that's something that definitely is, I hope, really that I get lots of feedback from readers is that the sense of place is usually really strong in my books, and that if you're saying it somewhere like Islay, you've got to get it right. You know, you've got to really get across what it's like to be in a place like that, which is very different from anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. The sense of place is particularly strong. And I've written down here, it feels as though you are finding your feet as a writer of thrillers because it's a thrilling read. You say
Yeah.
it was you found it easy to write. I think it was one that was easy to read in that you were really wanting to turn the page, you know, and it got you through. Was that a style of writing? I mean, you mentioned kind of were you kind of cutting sentences and down and feeling, yeah, I can get to where I want to go more quickly than perhaps previously.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. I think the first two, I mean, I think I wasn't a natural plotter. Like I didn't, I was like writing on vibes very much in the first two books a little bit.
Right.
I was good at creating scenes and you know, I could create an atmosphere and the characters are doing interesting things, but that was one of the things that was wrong with that first draft of the essays I wrote. It didn't have forward momentum. I mean, when I went back and rewrote it, I was putting in all sorts of other stuff that were actually was moving the book forward and was linking backwards and forwards. So I had to start properly thinking about plotting, and I found I loved it actually when I got to think about it. So there was that aspect to it, but also being properly edited in those first two books. And that was my editor at Penguin, but then also, I mean, it was a real light bulb moment for me. You know, the books came back, the manuscript. This was before it was even online. I got the physical paper manuscript in an
Yeah.
envelope, took it out, and apart from the fact it stank of fag smoke and it had red wine stains and cat paw prints on it, there was like lines on every page, basically scoring out all sorts of stuff like, you know, don't need this, don't need this, don't need that. And I was like, oh my God, yes, you're absolutely right. You know, 99% of those changes were like made it better. And so I became really quickly a really keen self-editor. Like I just was like, I've got this idea that, if it doesn't serve the purpose of the story, you take it out. Like, I mean, everything has to serve a purpose in there. It has to justify being in there for a story. And that's like a level of punctuation and then words and then sentences, paragraphs, sections, chapters. You can cut so much. It's about getting it down to bare bones. And I think I found that properly, the Smokeheads, and then I kept that going from then on, I think.
Yeah, and I think you can really tell that kind of fast pace. As I say, you kept that going with Hit and Run, which is the one I can't find of yours, but I know I had it because I remember I was quite chuffed with my title for my review of it, which was Pills, Thrills, and Faulty Breaks, which, as you pointed out, is not quite right, but it was good enough for me to put there.
That's
But
good.
you talk about sense of place. This was set in Edinburgh. Was it the first one set in Edinburgh?
It was the first one's totally set in Edinburgh. Yeah, there'd been bits of Edinburgh in the first couple of books, but yeah, yeah.
And I wondered if, a lot of your books are, and we'll talk more about certain ones in the series later on, but to me, in my mind, you've become a kind of Edinburgh writer. You do go elsewhere, but
Yeah.
that seems to be where you've got a really strong sense of place.
Yeah, I think I was as a young writer, I was slightly nervous about writing about Edinburgh. It's such a well-kent city, in terms of literature. It's like been written about for hundreds of years, and you kind of think originally I was sort of thinking, well, what have I got to add to this? But I mean that's so the first three books are mostly set outside Edinburgh. But then I thought, look, that's stupid. I've got all this life experience. I'd lived in this city since the late 80s, and that was already 20 years. And I just thought my experience of Edinburgh is completely different from any other writers, Ian Rankins or
Yeah,
Alexander McCall Smith or Irvin Welsh's or whoever it is. And so there was a deliberate idea to write like a properly Edinburgh set book. But again, it was about seeing the world around me and so, I mean, what I've realized is a lot of my standalone books set in Edinburgh, they're very localized. Like this
mhm.
one is almost all around the south side, basically, Arthur Seat and the Salisbury Crags. I very rarely go, I think they go to Newtown once, but you never get to Princess Street or the Royal Mile. I'm not interested in these places. Like, it doesn't, when that's for tourists, it doesn't feel like part of my city. And then later books are very localized within Edinburgh as well. And that was partly because that was the area I knew best at that time, Southside. I'd been a student and lived there in various flats for loads of time. But also it because the sense of the book is very claustrophobic. Like the
Yeah,
central character who commits the crime at the start of the book, it's basically the walls are closing in on him from page one. And so if he physically doesn't move away from this restricted area, either that gives another sense of like everything's just piling in on top of him. So that was very deliberate. And it's yeah, I was really chuffed with the idea for Hit and Run. It's the worst whodunit of all time because I tell you who done it on the first chapter. It's
mhm.
Billy. Billy done it. But I mean, the fact that he was a crime reporter who then had to report on the crime that he'd just committed, a hit and run. I just thought that was a great hook, and I loved it. And that just means that he's living a duplicitous life the whole time and falling apart as well because he can't handle the PTSD and the pressure and the guilt. And so yeah, I was really chuffed with how that turned out. And as a first sort of fully Edinburgh book, I was really happy with that.
Two things that you mentioned there. One, it showed me, as someone from outside Edinburgh, parts of the city I didn't know.
Right.
And, you know, particularly when they're driving in the cars, and as you say, the bottom of Arthur's seat, the sense of place is so strong that I know that I could have gone there and walked those streets and gone to exactly the places that they had. Another one is you take the kind of pace of the writing from Smokeheads and you just ramp it up another notch. Claustrophobic is a really good way of doing it. You're almost like breathless as a reader, kind of going, "Oh my God, how is this going to finish? How
Yeah.
is get away with it's the wrong term, but how is this going to conclude by
Yes.
that point?"
And I think it's always interesting. That's something that I kind of carry on now is like, I mean, you're basically an absolute sadist as a writer. Like every time you sit down at the desk, you're like, how can I make things worse for these guys? How can I ramp up the pressure on them? And so if they're getting pressure from one side, it's always quite interesting to like, then produce pressure from another side. And Billy is in that book is really self-destructive. He finds, I mean, he's killed a guy at the start of the book, and he finds himself sexually attracted to the guy's widow, and it's like, oh my God, what the fuck are you doing, you idiot? But it's like you can understand because he's not in his right mind. The whole thing is done in a kind of PTSD haze, where he can't really handle what he's done, and so yeah, so I've always been really keen to think, well, how can this situation get more desperate? Because that makes it more interesting for me as a writer and for the reader, hopefully.
And I think by this point, as a reader, I'm thinking, I'm kind of get a grip on what a Doug Johnson novel is here. He puts his protagonists in the worst possible situations and says, well, you know, how are you going to kind of get out of that if you do? But then comes Gone Again, which is a kind of real shift in pace and style. It's still thrilling, but there's a kind of emotional heft, I think, at that novel that perhaps there wasn't in previous. What did you do about Gone Again? Why did you want to write that book?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I certainly don't think about these things consciously when you're sitting. You just have an idea for a book and then you write it, and whatever
Right.
comes out in a way almost. So it wasn't my intention that this would be more emotionally resonant than the books that had gone before. But I suppose, I mean, the central set. I mean, it's about a guy whose wife goes missing, and so the idea for that book was, I mean, I was a dad to young kids, and I was at home because I'm a writer, and my wife is at a job, a proper job, and it can be incredibly stressful being a parent, obviously, of young kids. And imagine if your partner didn't come home, and then
Yeah.
literally, what would happen next, and then what would happen next, and then you phone their work, and they left at lunchtime, and then you phone the police, and well, they're not interested because they don't have the manpower, and then what do you do, and then what do you do, and then what do you do? So the book is really, I mean, it's not really about the guy's wife being missing. It's about his relationship with his son.
Yeah.
He's got a 5-year-old boy, and it's really about how he handles that pressure. So that is, I remember vividly Ian Rankin talking about Rebus once, and he said, I didn't give him kids because I didn't want him having to go off and do the school run in the middle of a, investigation. And I was like, no, no, that's the best bit. Like
Yeah.
that's the juice. That's where it gets really interesting because he's in the middle of something horrible, trying to find his wife, and then he has to go and do the school run, or like his son gets ill, and it might be psychosomatic, and he has to take him to the hospital, and but he's juggling all this stuff, and his wife's mother is also involved, like looking at and it's like, and again, it's coming to that pressure, but I guess that in this book, it's more emotional pressure than anything else. That he's kind of he's sort of suffering from this pre-grief almost.
Hmm.
It's an interesting idea that you don't necessarily have to grieve someone once they're dead. It's just if they're missing or you can't find them, you're already presupposing what's happened to them, and that's affecting the way you live. And so I was fascinated by that whole world. You become obsessed when you start an idea like that, you become obsessed. So I was obsessed with missing persons. I remember the stat at the time was like 100,000 people go missing every year in the UK. And then the thing I read said that half of them were found safe and sound, like, soon after. But that means half of them are not.
Yeah.
And it's like, thousands and thousands of people. I mean, a lot of them will end up on the streets effectively, or just starting new lives. But that's an incredible number of people who are just disappearing. I just found that absolutely fascinating. And so I wrote about it.
And when you brought a different book, I guess it's not as different as I maybe remember, but to your publisher, were they saying, well, no, we want more fast pace and car crashes and, drug taking and whatever, or was it not a problem?
No, absolutely not a problem. I was published by Faber at that point, and my editor there, they were great. I mean, it's so weird looking back on it now. It's quite an unusual relationship I've had with my editors. I've only had three editors in 20 books, which is very unusual for a start.
Mm.
But I've never ever had any pressure to write any kind of book, and from any editor, they've always just been, yeah, write whatever you want. Even with I didn't even used to tell my editor at Faber what I was writing. I would just write the book and then send it in, and they would either publish it or not, I guess. I mean, they published six of them and then they didn't, so that's how it went. And I just kind of think that I understand other writers work differently and work different ways, and sometimes you could be looking with an eye to the market or talking to your agent about what would be the most sellable idea, or talking to your editor about how you might make this the best it can be. But I've always been fairly um, independent and just basically writing about what I'm obsessed about, and hell mend anyone else basically. Either you publish it or you don't, and if you don't, okay, that's fair enough. I wrote the book I wanted to write, and it's a kind of stupid way of doing it if you try to make money as a career, but it's worked out okay, I guess, in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And next you move to the Deadbeat, which is back in central Edinburgh
Yeah.
and in the world of journalism, which I get you mentioned as a world you knew well. Um, Again, really fast paced. It's interesting, actually. I'm just looking at the cover here and it says best-selling author of Hit and Run. So was that because Gone Again hadn't been out, or is it because this is more closely, kind of linked to Hit and Run in a way?
That's a good question. I think, yeah, that's interesting. Gone Again sold better than Hit and Run,
Yeah.
actually. I got caught up in the Amazon algorithms, but in the UK and the US, and it sold a ton of copies somehow. I don't really understand how these things work. But yeah, it might actually be. And in fact, if you look at the covers, like
Yes.
the Deadbeat is more reminiscent of Hit and Run. So I think they were obviously pitching it more like that compared to Gone Again. But yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, Gone Again has a similar, I guess, a similar kind of vibe to Hit and Run a little bit.
Hmm.
Again, it's a young woman who's an obituary writer, and she gets a call at she's her first day in the office, and she working, and she gets a call, and it's this guy reading an obituary down the phone, and then he apparently shoots himself, and it was his own obituary. Um, which came
Yeah.
from, I remember reading about someone just in a news story in Canada, I think, or something, where a guy had phoned his ex-wife and then killed himself while he was on the phone to her. And my immediate, like, I mean, your writer's antennas are always going, you're looking for stuff. But my immediate reaction to that, well, I mean, apart your immediate reaction is holy shit. But
Yeah.
then the second reaction is, what would it be like to be on the other end of that call? That's like, because what a thing to do, phone someone up and kill yourself on the phone. It's like, Jesus Christ, that's so emotionally distressing. So what if it was your first day at work and you got that, and actually they might not be dead? You have to try and find out where they are. Can you go and maybe save them and all this sort of stuff? And then that opens a whole can of worms like all these books do. But yeah, I was kind of fascinated by the idea of I mean, obituaries and death. This is maybe the start of my death, my death obsession. I was really fascinated by that world, actually, and also this is the first one that's kind of explicitly more about mental health issues as well.
Hmm.
I think in the past, in the first few books, the central characters are quite clearly suffering from mental health issues, but they're undiagnosed and they're self-medicating, usually through drink and drugs. But with Martha in this book, she's more like she has, definitely has had experience of, serious depression,
Yeah.
and she's had like, electroconvulsive shock therapy and stuff like that. So, yeah, it was a way to look at that in a more in a more structured way, I think. I was just getting deeper into that stuff all the time.
And the title, The Deadbeat, that's from the world of journalism, isn't it?
That's what it's called when you write the obituaries. You're on the dead beat as opposed to the journalism beat or the politics beat or whatever. Yeah. So it's a great title straight away. I thought, yeah, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you think it's an accurate depiction of that world, or a bit like you getting your editorial notes, smelling of smoke, and with Weinstein's on it? Is that completely changed now?
Yeah, it has. I mean, actually, I think I mentioned in the it might be Hit and Run, because in Hit and Run, like the central characters are, a crime reporter.
Yeah.
And there's actually they're not sequels, but the Deadbeat has one character, a couple of characters that kind of that come again. And I actually mentioned in those books that, like, it's in the old Scotsman, but not the old Scotsman building, but the newer, older Scotsman building, if you know what I mean. Scotsman building. But it was basically where I used to work for the Evening News on and off as a freelancer. And even when I was there, it was starting to look a bit empty. Like
Right.
there were empty desks. And so I put that in those books. I mean, they subsequently sold that building to Rockstar Games, and I've moved to like a shed out in Chester somewhere. Because there's hardly anyone doing it. I mean, all the journalists are doing five jobs, and push for time, and basically, half of them are using AI to generate stuff to meet deadlines and whatever. So it feels like, yeah, a sort of depiction of a world that's kind of gone like
Yeah.
that. You don't really get a busy newsroom now. That's not a thing. I mean, I was never a news reporter. I was an arts journalist, but still, I was in the same building as these people. And I suspect that there isn't really that vibe at all anymore.
A bit like the kind of scenes of touring of the Ossians. It's maybe a world which is kind of, in the
Yeah,
past
I
in
think
that
so.
way.
I mean, for better or worse. I mean, there are obviously good things and bad things about it, but at least, I mean, when I was writing for the Evening News, like we had 2 pages to fill of arts coverage every day, and on a Thursday there was like a 12-page supplement. So
Yeah.
that's how much arts coverage we were writing,
It's incredible, isn't it?
and like you think there's basically none now. I mean,
Mhm.
there's nothing in the Evening News. It's incredible, yeah.
Yeah. So the next book, The Jump, is another emotional novel. I can remember reading it and being really moved by it. You've spoken about how increasingly mental health was the discussions around it or characters, with it are in your books. Can you talk a bit about The Jump?
Yeah, it was like I mean, I was really proud of the jump, and I
Yeah.
remember the editor saying to me that he was as well. That it got short. My first book that was shortlisted for the Marco Vanni Prize actually. Um, but I think it's kind of, I mean, if I was to pick one in my back list that's underrated, it's probably that one. It
Right.
didn't sell very well. I think it's a hard sell. It's about suicide.
Hmm.
And it's not, I mean, I was kind of fed up of reading crime novels where someone commits suicide at the start and you find out halfway through that actually it was a serial killer, blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to write a book about suicide where they committed suicide and that was it. And you don't get an answer because that's the reality of suicide,
Yeah.
which is not an easy sell for, it's not a cheery little read for like, it's not cozy crime. It's like, it's not let's go and crime. It's not a vicar trying to solve crimes in a village or whatever. So it's tough, but I wanted to write about it because I had been affected by suicide in my life, in my family, and I wanted to write about that lack of closure or how you might try and cope with these things. So, I mean, the book starts with there's like a woman whose teenage son has succumbed to suicide in the past, and she walks along the fourth floor bridge where he jumped from every day, and she finds another teenage boy there, like about to kill himself, and she stops him,
Hmm.
and he has blood on him, but it's not his. So there's the setup, great. But it's really, I mean, that's the thrillery angle of it, but it's definitely more about being inside the central character's head, about how she copes with her own grief
Yeah.
and how she gets involved with this teenage boy in sort of ways that are, dubious at best, and what has gone on in his life and how she kind of gets to grips with that. And so I can remember it didn't occur to me at all when I was writing it that this would be a hard book for people to read or for me to talk about. And I remember the very first event I did, the very first event, the first question I got from the audience was, "Have you ever attempted suicide?" And I said, "Well, no." And he said, "Well, what gives you the right to write about it?" And I was like, at the time I gave the sort of answer of like, I mean, you can write about anything if as long as you treat the subject matter with empathy and respect and blah, blah, blah. That's what we do is put ourselves in
Yeah.
other people's shoes. But I remember afterwards thinking, like, almost every crime novel has a murderer in it. You don't, like, crime writers don't get asked, have you ever tried to commit murder?
Yeah.
What gives you the right to write about it? But it's so close to people.
Yeah.
It's such a difficult subject. Like, hardly nobody mentioned in that audience or other book event audiences about their own personal experiences. But then in the signing queue afterwards, every single person said to me, "Oh, my niece dies of suicide. My uncle did it. My dad, my whatever, my best friend." So everyone, like loads of people have these experiences,
Sure.
but it's kind of like a last taboo almost to
Mhm.
talk about publicly. People find it very stressing, and I understand that completely. And so I was really proud of that book. But I mean, I got nominated for the prize, which was great. But
Yeah.
I think looking at the sales figures, I think it didn't fly off the shelves. Let's put it that way.
It's one of my favourites of your books for all the reasons you've explained. I remember reading it distinctly, and it was quite tough to read. I guess that's a good thing. Was it quite tough to write?
Yeah, it was at times actually. Yeah, there was times when I was thinking you kind of get in, you're stuck in the middle of the book, and we're right inside the head of the central character, and I just think, why did I do this? Why did I do this again? And actually, I think a lot of the stuff is hardest at the start of the book because you're thrown into that world like really quickly. I think, I mean, it does become like more, it's not an action thriller, but there is stuff, there's action, there's stuff
Yeah.
on a boat when they have to scuttle a boat and swim back to shore and all sorts of stuff later on, which I really enjoyed. So once that stuff starts happening, it's kind of easier because it's less emotional. But yeah, it was tough to write at times. Actually, I had to step away from the computer a few times just to
Yeah.
go out and get a bit of fresh air and clear your head a little bit.
So, was your next novel, Crashland, at all a reaction to writing The Jump? Or
I
was it
think,
just because this isn't set in Edinburgh, it's in Orkney, if I
yeah,
remember rightly.
yeah. I think you're all. I'm always. It's not conscious, but I think I do always subconsciously write in kind of reaction to what I've written before. You're always trying to write something different. So I definitely was thinking, well, I need to have something that's a bit more high octane, certainly. I mean, the Crashland starts with a plane crash in Orkney. It's basically there's a fight on a plane and then it crashes. And that's just the start of the mayhem. It gets like a lot worse after that. And so I was really that was deliberately I was kind of writing. I mean, that was so much fun to write. Like just writing a kind of crazy action sequence at the start of a book was great. And then there is a kind of element of intrigue and mystery because the central character is kind of besotted with this older woman who was on the flight who walks away like and then disappears. And so I definitely was wanting to do that again. Part of it is I was just fascinated by. I mean, there's a couple of things that are obviously happening in books over and over again. A sense of claustrophobia in this
Yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the central character can't get off Orkney. Like he keeps trying and never makes it. And the sense of place as well. I think this has a kind of similar. It's similar to Isla again. That you can't. You're set on on an archipelago and you can't really get out of it. And that sort of links into that sort of small community vibe as well, and the conflicts between locals and outsiders, so-called outsiders. So all of that stuff kind of feeds into Crashland as well. And I just love Orkney. Orkney is a setting. When I had been to Orkney a couple of times long before I was published a writer, but I remember thinking, I'll definitely use this. Like walking about places like some of the Neolithic, sites or Viking sites or the cliff top walks and thinking, God, this is just, it's built-in drama. If you just put stuff here, it's absolutely brilliant.
That's really what's remained with me from Crashland was the use of the landscape as somewhere to kind of almost a character in itself to struggle against. That you
Yeah.
don't have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I put in it, it's really funny because there's a great Orcadian writer, Alison Miller, who I know from way back. And I got her to read it on an early version of it just to make sure because she's Orcadian through and through. I got a lot of the Orkney stuff right, and there was a bit where the central character like opens a car door and has to hold on to it so it doesn't blow off in the wind because it's so windy. And she just put an exclamation mark and said, "Yes, absolutely, this always happens." And I was like, "It's brilliant." Winter time in Orkney, you have to hold on your car doors. But yeah, like there's a sense of it being absolutely elemental
Yeah.
out there in the like in the middle of nowhere almost sometimes and kind of just desperate. And I love that as well. I love writing that sort of nature stuff where a single character or characters are basically the physical world is coming to get them. I love that
Yeah.
sort of stuff.
And so different from the bustling streets of Edinburgh as well. That would
Yeah,
be quite
absolutely.
a shift. So that was your last book for Faber, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And then you moved to Orenda with the first novel being Fault Lines,
Yes.
which is an interesting novel for all sorts of reasons. One, you must have been one of the first people published by Orenda, were you?
Yeah, I mean, I must have been in the early days. So when did that book come out? Good question.
2018, I've got written down here.
18. So I think that they might have been going since 2015, maybe. David Ross was before me, definitely,
Yeah.
and a couple of others. But yeah, I knew Karen from Orenda, Karen Sullivan from Orenda. I knew her already because I had done lots of events with her other authors.
Hmm.
Because we were writing kind of similarly around the edges of crime fiction, kind of slightly subversive or slightly weird, around the periphery of that genre. So I knew her other authors already from events and festivals, and I knew her a little bit. And so it seemed like an obvious connection. When I sent the book to her, she loved it. It's a weird book. I can understand why it's not an obvious sell. Again, it's like it's set in an alternative Edinburgh, which is a major volcano and earthquake zone, which is not that weird an idea because, like, I think one of the things that had prompted that was there when there'd been a large earthquake in Christchurch.
Okay.
I think not that long before, and I just thought, we have this idea that like earthquakes and volcanoes and that stuff is somewhere else, and it's not always somewhere, it's not somewhere else if that's where you're from. I'd also been to Iceland and saw an exhibition about Surtsey, which is a volcanic island off the coast of Iceland, which, grew out of nothing in the 1960s. Basically, there was an undersea eruption and then an island appeared. And that's happened in Japan more recently as well. And I just found that idea really fascinating. So I kind of posited this world where this had all happened 20 years previously. There was a new island in the Firth of Forth that had appeared after a volcanic eruption, and there's regular earthquakes. I mean, it's pretty heavy on the old metaphor there, but it's good. But it was really interesting to write about. So the central character is basically a volcanologist who discovers a dead body on the island when they go there, and it's her boss. Um, and so I just thought it was really fascinating. So a lot of that is set in central Edinburgh around the university and all that kind of area, and about Portobello, where you can see the island. But I was kind of had this. I mean, it starts off like a kind of murder mystery. It ends up like an action movie.
Hmm.
Like it's an absolutely sort of massively over the top, like crazy end of book climax where it sees the island sinking into the ocean again, while people are trying to get off it. So I had so much fun writing that, and it's hard to really explain. It didn't really occur to me. I mean, this is a speculative book. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
elements of in it, but it's a normal crime novel, except there just happens to be a bunch of volcanoes and earthquakes going on, which I think is, who doesn't want to read that?
But looking back, as we're doing, I wonder if it kind of foreshadows the series that you write for Orenda later on. It's kind of dipping your toe in speculative, even sci-fi fiction, which you do in the Enceladon trilogy, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah,
But even some of the places and characters in the Skelf series are kind of reflected. I'm thinking of the use of the university and scientific academic backgrounds and all those things.
yeah, yeah.
Were you beginning to think you might write in different genres?
Definitely. I thought no, I don't even think it was that conscious. It was probably subconscious. But I mean, I had always been interested in science fiction and speculative fiction. And it was a way of dipping my toe in the water because I think I wasn't quite yet confident enough to write that I had the skill set to write that sort of stuff. But I mean, what I had done was written of pretty much Edinburgh as it is, except with these, changes. I had to do a lot of and I really enjoyed writing about the science stuff. There's lots of volcanology and geology stuff in there as well. And I loved writing about that and just sort of that academic part of it as well, without it being stuffy or anything like that. The
Yeah.
central. It's kind of more in the background, which I think is really good and really it's just something I'm really interested in. So I hadn't really used my science. I've got science background. I hadn't really used that at all in my fiction up until this point. So it was definitely a little glimpse of what was to come for sure.
We've kind of hinted at it, but you do enjoy the research behind each novel that you do.
Yeah, you become. I think that there should be a better word for it than research because it doesn't feel like research. Research sounds like work, but it's not work because all you're doing is reading about stuff you're mad interested in. So it's like, well, what's better than that? I mean, it's a good excuse to spend half a day on a computer, just basically watching YouTube videos or reading articles or reading books or listening to audiobooks or going to places and going, well, what's happening here? What's it like to be here? What would happen if this happened? And so I love all that stuff. And so much of it doesn't get used.
Yeah.
Ali, I chuck like 95% of it away. I've got like the way I plan books is I've got streams of consciousness blether for like, I type documents for weeks, sometimes months, and it gradually coalesces into something, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that just gets left. But it's important to sort of write informed by that stuff
Yeah.
rather than explicitly talking about it. And occasionally I forget to put stuff in that is like just not that clear. And so then usually an editor will be like, well, maybe you just need to explain this a little bit. And I always try and do it in as few words as possible because it's, you want to move on with the story and the characters and the emotions.
But that's, I think, one of the interests about you as a writer, because you mentioned with some of the earlier books, you realised you need to get rid of stuff that's not driving the story forward, that's kind of
Yeah.
taken away from that. But I know some writers who have done all this research and they want to show it, but it's in there,
Yeah.
a bit like knowing the place or whatever it might be. It feeds into, there's a kind of, you trust the writer and I guess you trust the characters that what their background is. We know that it's, not just made up.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly it. I've been rereading lots of James Sallis recently after he sadly passed away
Mm.
recently, and he's an absolute expert at this. His books are really short, like really short, like something like Drive, which is his most famous book. It's probably not his best one in my opinion, but it's definitely the one that was made into a movie. But I mean, it's got all of this stuff in it about driving and about
Yeah.
Hollywoods and about cars, but it's worn so lightly on the shoulders of the character. It's just sort of slightly. It's like it's between the lines almost. It's so beautifully done. And there's another book where there's a character who's a nurse, and I think James actually helped in a hospital when he worked in a hospital, and like the detail of people's ailments or how things are treated is just so beautifully handled. And I love that. I think you don't need pages of description or detail or backstory. You just need like a couple of phrases or the way that someone would think about something that is distinctly them because of their experience, like what their life is like. And that's all it takes for you to be 100% on board and understand this character and what their life is like.
Yeah, and I think that really does come through. Now, your next novel for Orenda, and it's another of my favourites, is Breakers. Again, a kind of slight shift in pace. It's a family drama. It looks at class. It looks at poverty. Parts of Edinburgh, again, I think many people will not be aware of who are from outside the city. Why did you want to write this one?
Well, yeah, it's like, where'd you get your ideas from? Well, for this one, I was burgled. So, I live in Portobello in Edinburgh, and so we got burgled, and this is years ago now, and it's a long story, but the way they got in, the MO that they did it, meant that somebody had to be a child. They needed a kid to get in a small window and then let everyone else in. And obviously, when you're burgled, the first reaction is, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" You're obviously all sorts of negative things. But at the same time, I remember thinking, what must that person's life be like? If
Yeah,
there's a kid who's in a burgling gang, basically a housebreaking gang. And so this book was born from that. It's set in Edinburgh in Craigmillar and Niddrie, which is not far from me. Literally, the police officer said, "Oh, we'll just go and round up the usual suspects,"
mm,
because they had various people they just pull in from Niddrie who are known to the police. And so they basically live in the poorest part of Edinburgh. They drive to the richest part. They go over to like Morningside and stuff, and they basically break into folks' houses and take stuff. And sort of Tyler, the central character, is coerced into doing this by his sort of half brother, who's a massive bully and a tyrant. But I was also really interested in. I mean, I think this is probably my favorite of my standalone books.
yeah,
Those first 10 novels. It kind of was like the end point of that standalone thing, and I think it is the one that got closest to what I imagined it to be like, as before I wrote it. I just thought it worked. There's so much in it that works, I think, which doesn't isn't necessarily always the case. But I mean, again, it's got that thing where Tyler's getting the pressure from everywhere. So he's involved in this gang. He's getting pressure from his siblings who are forcing him to do this. He doesn't like to do it. He's looking after his little sister. His mum is a drug addict and he has to look after her. Um, they make a mistake at the start of the book and somebody gets stabbed and then there's a crime gang after him. The police also kind of know what he's done but need him to. So there's like three or four
Yeah.
elements of pressure on him all the way through the book. And he's got a couple of releases. One he's sort of because the other thing is that he also breaks into people's houses on his own and doesn't do anything bad. He just sits there for some psychological peace of mind, to imagine he's in a different world. Um, which I got from there's a brilliant graphic novelist called Adrian Tomine. I don't know if you know him.
Oh no.
He's actually a graphic short story writer, probably is the best way to describe him. But there's a brilliant short story where an American Iraq veteran comes back home and realizes he's still got the key to his old apartment that he moved out of, and he basically does surveillance on it. And when the owner's out, he basically lets himself in and sits in his apartment. And it's a way, obviously, of dealing with PTSD. He's like trying to get back what he had before he went away to it. And it's a beautiful thing. But then someone breaks in while he's inside. And so I just totally ripped that off. I just thought that's such a good idea. So in this book, Tyler's in a house when a girl flick breaks in, and then it's kind of a love interest. But there's like also she's very rich and goes to a boarding school, and he's
Yeah.
obviously from the poorest part of Edinburgh. So there's a whole thing about poverty, safari, and like basically, you think you're slumming it, but on how do you deal with it if you're rich and you have empathy for poor people, but then it just feels condescending, and so there's all sorts of stuff going on there. And again, but I mean, it's all packed into 60,000 words. It's like really short and snappy. And I was just very proud of this book actually when it came out. And again, I got shortlisted for the McIlvanney Prize, and I think it did pretty well in sales. It's certainly it's one of the books that I get most feedback from readers. A lot of people have said it's like one of their favorite of my books,
Yeah.
which I'm really grateful for.
I would agree with that definitely, and the characters in it. This young boy who is just being pressured, as you say, kind of squeezed from all parts, and the way that he finds his kind of release, and that relationship as well is just a fantastic one as well, because I think it captures relationships at that age too, despite everything else.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a kind of innocence to it in a
Yeah.
little bit. There's this kind of bit. I mean, the book opens with Tyler and his little sister up on the roof. They're in a massive
Mhm.
tenement, 17 stories high. That's the only one around. And then the book ends there as well with the kind of girl as well. And I just that there's a kind of innocent romanticism to it, an element where because Tyler's had his childhood taken away from him, like he hasn't had a proper childhood, but this kind of feels like, he's a 17-year-old and he's kind of got this burgeoning romance thing going that at the end of the book is kind of like, well, this might actually work out okay for him, which is not always something that you feel at the end of my books. Certainly those first books sometimes. But that was something that definitely I noticed that it felt more optimistic by the end, probably.
I think as a reader, you want to have some hope at the end.
Yeah,
Whereas in some of the previous books, you think, well, there's just desserts. Perhaps going on there.
yeah.
So that was your last standalone novel, which is interesting in itself. You then
Yes.
go on to write two series, and we should say that the 20th book of your 20 is going to be in the Skelf series, coming out in
Yeah.
August.
It's coming out in August, yeah. It'll be the seventh book in that series called Ghost Notes, coming out in the middle of August. I think we're launching it at the Edinburgh Book Festival, I think.
And I can just quickly show you the other six, which are here.
Okay. Wow, look at that.
Fantastic. That looks good, doesn't it? Skelf series of books. Can you talk a little bit about those? Because it's a great series, Doug. It really is. What a brilliant cast of characters again. And again, a family drama.
Yeah, family drama. Yeah, it's a great setup. I really enjoy writing those books still. So the central premise is that three generations of women from the same family have to take over the running of a funeral directors and a private investigators when the patriarch of the family dies. So that's not a spoiler. Jim, they set fire to his body at the start of page one of the first book. But yeah, there's a couple of things that sort of led into it. I kind of thought, I mean, looking back now, it was kind of subconscious, but after Breakers, I just thought, kind of like, that's as good as it's going to get, like standalone books. And I just, that because I was so happy with how that had gone, I thought I need to do something very different.
Right.
You're always trying to challenge yourself as a writer anyway, but I thought, well, I had been toying with the idea of a series or at least a trilogy. That's what I originally first saw it as. Um, and I had this idea of, I mean, I had a couple of competing ideas. I had been the writer in residence at a funeral director's for 6 months, which always gets weird laughs and questions at book events. So I had basically worked. I mean, it's a long story, but the upshot was a small non-fiction book where I basically was using journalism. So I interviewed members of staff, job shadowed them. So I sat in on funerals being arranged, ceremonies. Um, Picking up bodies from the morgue and the nursing homes, sitting in on embalmings and all that sort of stuff. So I did all this stuff, and the experience, it wasn't obvious to me how that would ever be a book. And they used to joke about it, and I was like, well, I don't know, because books, fiction thrives on conflict and tension, but this is absolutely, you're all diffusing conflict and tension at an incredibly stressful time. So, but the experience stayed with me. I really loved I knew I wanted to write about it somehow, but didn't really think I could be able to do it. At the same time, because there's not a plot engine there. Do you know what I mean? It's just people doing good things and trying to make the world a slightly better place in a hard time, which is admirable, but it's maybe not a thriller, you know. Um, at the same time, for years, I'd had this weird idea about a middle-aged woman who has to take over running a private investigators when her dad dies, and she doesn't know how to do it. And the idea for that was it was kind of a Rockford Files kind of thing,
Okay.
throwback.
Yeah, yeah.
But also, I don't know how to be a PI, so then I could learn on the job, the same as the character. And I had the name, I had Jenny Skelf written down on a bit of paper somewhere. And I just one day I just thought, well, what if these two ideas became the same thing and made it more expansive so it wasn't just about one woman but three. So there's Dorothy and Jenny and Hannah who are basically different generations, 70, 45, and 20 years old at the start of the first book. And they have to run the funeral the funeral business. Even they're dealing with their own grief for Jim who's died at the first book, and also having to help other people with their grief. And they're also having to solve these cases or whatever that come up that are very often personal or come through funerals, which I think is not that big of a stretch because
Yeah.
weird things happen at funerals all the time. And so the Skelps was born. So that first book of Dark Matter came out in 2020, just before lockdown and COVID, which was good timing. But there's been, yeah, 6 books in the series now, and I feel like it's massively progressed. I mean, they were in all sorts of different ways, but it's become more progressive and more forward-looking and more optimistic and positive, I think. I mean, the books were always positive, despite
Yeah.
them being, about death. And I always wanted to write about the funeral industry in an honest and clear and positive way because I think it's something that we really struggle with, especially in the West, is dealing with death. We think of someone dies and then you pull a curtain over and it's like, well, let the funeral people deal with all that, which I think is not a particularly mentally healthy way of dealing with bereavement and grief. And so I wanted to write about it in an honest way that actually feels hopeful and positive.
Yeah. I think one, you've talked about optimism, you've got these three central characters whose relationships are fantastic and strong and supportive. On the whole, there's little division along the way.
Yeah.
And also it allows for the pace of them. You jump between characters, between chapters. So, it's moving at the pace of what we talked about earlier on, right through
Yeah.
them. These are properly thrilling reads.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So this is, I mean, it's not the first time that I'd written from more than one point of view, but it's a deliberate three-hander.
Hmm.
So each of the three women get, I mean, more or less the same page time in each book. It's meant to be their joint story, which I only kind of realized afterwards is like nobody else writes like that. I mean, if you've got lots of different POVs, it tends to be the main character, then the sidekick, then the antagonist, and blah blah blah. And I was like, well, who cares? So I'm. So it's three stories at once, and they all kind of intertwine, both their personal stories and the funerals they're doing and the private investigator stuff. And so it gives you a chance to, exactly right, that helps the pace because you're always cutting away to the next one.
Yeah.
Also, you have this weird trick where you can actually be quite contemplative and slow and thoughtful, but also fast at the same time. So you can allow for a whole scene where Dorothy is just thinking about her husband while looking at his ashes. But then the next scene is, something else more dramatic that's moving it somewhere else. And there's lots of contemplation of life and death and also science and physics because Hannah is a physics
Yeah.
student and the sort of and the ways in which we look at the world, whether it's Western viewpoints or more indigenous ideas or Eastern philosophy also comes into it. How we cope with grief, bereavement, whether it's through meditation and Buddhism or like drinking heavily and shagging the wrong people or whatever it is. And so it allows it's a beautiful little vehicle for me to explore all sorts of ideas while also still having like I mean these books are I've got a lot of plot in them, like more plot than anything else I've ever written because I've got umpteen things to get solved and other things to and but they don't feel rushed.
No.
They feel like it gives there's space as well to breathe, which is it's delightful. I love it. I love writing them.
And because you've got this series, you allow strands of the stories to go through all of them. Some you'll deal with in individual books, but others feed into the next one, or even some all six.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I said, yeah, I initially thought of it as a trilogy, and I had this idea that there's an arc that goes through the first three books,
Yeah.
which I won't. It's a spoiler, so I won't mention it. But and I thought, and I wrote those three books, and even when I was writing the third one, I thought this is not the end. Partly, I was really enjoying writing, spending time with the characters and writing the books, but also I find it that kind of false like closure and wrapping up stuff in like bows. I find that really annoying in fiction. I know fiction isn't real life, but that's 100% not real life. And so one of the things in the books is Dorothy is kind of the most open-minded of the three characters, and she's always thinking like, what's it like from someone else's point of view? So even if you write about a character who, for example, in the first three books is ostensibly a bad person, right? then but then also they're someone's like son or daughter or husband or wife or brother or sister or mother or father, like, so what do these other people think of them? So when it came to like the fourth book, I was looking at, well, actually this person might be dead, but that doesn't mean that their influence on the story ends, and looking at what other people might have thought of them. And so actually that central arc that I originally envisaged over three books is really five books. It
Yeah.
doesn't get any closure until the end of the fifth book, probably. And yet other stuff has come up through since then,
Yeah.
and then that has kind of overlapped and dovetailed into like the later books. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's publishers always tell you, yeah, you have to tell readers, oh, you can read them individually, it's fine, and you
Yes,
absolutely
you
can. You
can.
can dip in. But I think it would be a richer experience if we were to start in the first book because there's definitely a way that the characters themselves and the job that they do and the way they see the world have progressed over the books in a way that I think makes it a much deeper and more resonant read, hopefully, for people.
It's kind of the difference between a standalone film and a series,
Yeah,
which, over a period of time where new characters can appear, influence what's going on. A strand might start in episode three or in book three, which then goes on to book seven or whatever it might be. It's everyday life, isn't it? These things occur to them, happen to them, some of which are quite ordinary, some thoughts which are quite ordinary. And then that feeds into the kind of extraordinary stuff that's going on as well.
yeah, definitely. And it's quite odd to me to think of the Skelf series as individual books. Like if someone said to me what happens in book two or book four, I would actually struggle a little bit because they feel like you say, they feel like a TV show to me. They feel like a thing, a one unit of stuff for the characters gradually developing over things. And in actual fact, I mean, I know there is a lot of plot in them, but I mean, this is a terrible thing to say as a crime writer, but I'm not very interested in plot. I'm not very, it's not that important. It's a device for
Yeah.
emotional impact, right? So I don't necessarily think you have to solve a crime even. for it to be a great book. There's an I mean, back to James Sallis. There's an amazing book, one of his last novels called Will Not, which starts with six bodies found in the woods, like buried in the woods, and that never gets solved. It's
Yeah.
fucking great. You never get closure on that, and it's fucking brilliant. It's one of the best things I've ever read. It's so good. And I just love the idea of like actually, as long as you're creating the characters and taking the reader on an emotional journey through like what's happening, that's the important thing. I mean, you can't, I mean, obviously, I mean, it's a question of good and bad writing. You can't build them up expectations and then just drop it. You have
Yeah.
to, and at some point, I think readers will realize, well, this is about the journey, not the destination, which is like life in it.
Well, and that goes back to way back to Hit and Run, where you say it's a who done it, but we tell you who done it right at the very beginning, so you can kind of ignore that bit and then go and see
Well, yeah,
how it
I
works.
remember absolutely. I remember I interviewed Denise Miner once, and she said, like, who done it is one of only a million questions you can get the reader to ask. And it's
Yeah,
not even the most interesting one quite often.
yeah,
And like, Elizabethan, Jacobean tragedies, Greek tragedies don't use whodunits. They don't need that sort of stuff, you know? It's
yeah.
about how this is going to come back to bite the characters on the arse, or how their downfall is going to happen, or whatever it is that's going to come and hit them. Yeah, it's great.
Do you think the idea of genre is important in books, or is that just to kind of sell and categorize them?
I think in terms of writers, it's completely irrelevant. I say this at book events and people sort of snigger a little bit and don't really get it, but I don't understand genre. I don't know what it is.
Mm,
I genuinely don't. I don't think in terms of genre. Um, and I never have. And I genuinely don't really know. And all the books that I like are ones that don't fit into a single genre. Like that's automatically what I'm attracted to. I understand the need for it for booksellers and for readers, like, and there's stuff that is bang in the middle of a genre, like, your cozy detective series are like this, but I mean, people know what they're going to get, and there's obviously a place for that, and that's absolutely fine, but I'm just not interested in that at all. And over again, the books that I find the most interesting are ones that are not easily categorizable. So, and I certainly have never thought of writing a book in a particular genre. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
well, that takes us neatly on to the Enceladon series of books,
Yes.
which some people may call science fiction.
Yeah.
But so these would you consider these your most successful novels? What I mean by that is, I know they got, but my mum's read them because she saw it was referenced on the telly,
Oh
and
yeah.
therefore, so it was in her book group that kind of read the first one. First of all, maybe tell us what they are, because some people
Yeah.
won't know.
Sure. So there's three books in the series. So effectively, I mean, I remember pitching the book events. My elevator pitch for the first book was it's like Thelma and Louise meets E.T. set in the Scottish Highlands. Which it kind of is. So it's basically I mean it's not really anything like that, but it's set in a recognizable modern day Scotland. The
Yeah.
first book is anyway, where three central characters who are alone in their own lives, and they all are attracted to this creature that washes up on a beach in East Lothian, a kind of octopus creature who it turns out is from one of Saturn's moons called Enceladus, who they nicknamed Sandy. And they have to go on a road trip to basically save it. They have to take it to find others of its kind, which is across. It ends up being in the Loch of Ullapool. So it's a road trip set in Scotland. It just happens to have a telepathic octopus from one of Saturn's moons in it, I guess. So it's a first contact. I mean, it is science fiction. I wouldn't. I mean, it was obviously science fiction because it's got an alien in it, but it's not like science fiction like space opera novels
No.
or like most of things that are science fiction in films and movies, which are big sort of like cowboys in space shooting guns and lasers and lightsabers and what have you. All of which is great, and I love all that shit, but. I wanted to write a book that was the first book that was like an honest and proper first contact. What if ordinary people were to come into contact with an alien creature from another environment off Earth? And so that was one of the basic ideas, and I absolutely loved doing the research about alien consciousnesses, animal consciousnesses, how we might think, how we might communicate if we were brought up in different places. I read whole books about Saturn's moons and, and stuff like that, which was fantastic. But essentially, it's about, I mean, there's about three central characters who find a sense of family. It's a found
Yeah,
family story
yeah.
um, through through each other and through this octopus creature Sandy that they didn't have before. So it's about human connection. It's about how we communicate with others. It's about how we react to each other and to the world around us. As the books have progressed, so there's three books. So the first one is kind of a road trip from the southeast of Scotland up to the northwest. The second one is kind of like a prison breakout. It's set on an American military base outside Ullapool, where things have escalated. And then the third one is set mostly in Greenland. A lot of it underwater, a lot of it telepathic. My audiobook reader absolutely hates me for this book. Was, I mean, he hates the trilogy. I mean, he hates the trilogy. I mean, he doesn't hate it, but he's like, it's a big ask. So a lot of the dialogue in it is telepathic. How do you do that? And then with the third book especially, there's a lot of Greenlandic and Greenlandic place names and words and pronunciations, and a lot of the action takes place underwater with dialogue telepathically, which was a really big challenge to write actually as well. But I fucking loved it. It was great. I was having so much fun. And I think, yeah, I'm really proud of these three books. I don't know if they've been the most successful. The Space Between Us, like you mentioned, was on Between the Covers on BBC Two. And it was so funny because Sarah Cox presented it and she said, I don't normally read science fiction, but this is really good. And then every single other celebrity on the panel said, yeah, I don't normally read science fiction, but this is really good. So that's my sales pitch. It's
Yeah.
like, if you don't read science fiction, this is the book for you. Because I think people have this idea about science fiction that it's kind of all about lasers and like boring stuff about how you get a teleporter to work or however it is. Whereas this is an emotional book about ordinary people who are just thrown into an extraordinary circumstance. I don't see it as that different from the Skelf series. It's about similar themes, actually. It just so happens to be written in a different kind of way, I guess.
I think the best science fiction is actually about family and relationships. Anyway, go back to the original Star Trek. That was a kind of slightly odd family. That's why
Yes.
it kind of resonated, I think. And the third one in particular, I found almost painful to read. It was so breathtaking. It was, oh my God, how are they going to kind of resolve this? Because it is about the characters and the relationships that they build up over the books, and I include Sandy in this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you really come to care about what is happening to every single one of them.
Well, that's really kind. I think, I mentioned The Jump as being kind of underrated. I think so far the Transcendent Tide is a little bit underrated as well, partly because it's the third book in a trilogy, so people need to catch up. That's fine, I get it. But I mean, it came out in August last year. I didn't really have that many events and festival stuff talking about it. Um, Partly because it's the third book in a trilogy, I think. But I'm really proud of it. I mean, it was the biggest challenge I've had to write by a mile. By a mile. It's the first time I'd written extensively about a place that isn't Scotland. So I had to really do a ton of research about that and make sure I got that right. And it's set in East Greenland, which is the remote part of Greenland, which is saying something. And so there isn't East Greenlandic has its own language, so there's no online dictionary. There's nothing you can check. I spent forever on YouTube trying to, following footage of people hunting seals and stuff like that. But it's so, and then, eventually I got managed to get it checked by someone from Tasiilaq. So that was a real challenge. All the underwater stuff is a real challenge. How I'm going to bring these threads together in the end in a sort of
Mm.
in an emotionally resonant way. I mean, you've read it. I won't spoil it, but there's a crazy climax to the book. Like the action climax is fucking ridiculous. But I remember writing it. I first came up with the idea for it, and I was like, started writing it. I used to stop because I was laughing so hard at how fucking ridiculous it was. And just imagining people reading it, I was like making me laugh because I was like, oh, this is great. Oh, I fucking love this. This is so out there. But it was a real stretch, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed all that stuff. But then it still has to have a kind of emotional resonance at the end of,
Definitely.
what happens as well with the central characters, because, they don't all necessarily have happy endings, that's for sure. And so I'll wait and see. I think a little bit. It feels like it's, the books won't not even been out for a year yet, so I
Yeah.
don't know. But I'm really proud of it, and I hope that people kind of connect with it in the way that I'm in.
It's a tremendous series, and I think connects to a lot of concerns which, are spoken about widely today. And I would agree with Sarah Cox. If you think you don't like science fiction, then these books will definitely be something that you'll enjoy because that's not the point of them, I don't
Yeah,
think.
and the books gradually. I mean, the first book was quite obviously a kind of about refugees, how we treat
Yeah,
other people or other things. So, how we treat other people, how we treat animals or other creatures, and then that gradually progressed. And as the third book is definitely it's about how we treat the planet, how we might possibly go about living in a world without destroying it, which is very pertinent at the moment. And that's something that I definitely think I have ideas for future books that are they're mostly in the speculative kind of area. That are things that I'm definitely those are themes that important things that I think I definitely want to write about. You have to find the right vehicle for it. You have to find the right thing that's
yeah,
going to still be a personal story that's drifting through everything. But I think I think writers have to. I mean, writers don't have to do anything; they can do what the fuck they want. But writers, I think it's important. I mean, these are the most existential, important things that are happening in the planet right now.
yeah,
Like late stage capitalism and consumerism are destroying the fucking world. The way that multinational corporations are behaving is disgusting. The way that politicians are behaving is abhorrent. And I think the vast majority of people hate it. But we all feel like we're stuck in this system
yeah,
that we can't get out of, but we can get out of it. We just have to think of and talk about a way of changing things. And I think that it's important for me to try and look at that kind of thing a little bit, which I was doing with the Enceladus series for sure.
yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to the present day. You've got so Tombstoning's out, the republish of that. Ossians is coming out in April, I think you said.
Yeah.
Are there plans to republish any of the others?
I don't think so. Those two books were out of print because they
Right.
were with a different publisher, and they had been out. I mean, you could get the ebooks, but they were out of print and physical. So it made sense to get these out there, and actually, it's been really the response to Tombstone, especially, has been incredibly encouraging and very positive. I've been very happy. I don't think there are any more plans. My publisher has inquired, but I'm not sure there's as much point in getting some of the other backlist out. And also, I mean, I think there might be technical contractual reasons why
Okay.
that can't happen yet because they're not out of print at the moment. And I think it made sense to do it now because it's the 20th anniversary of the first book
Yeah.
and it's going to be 20 books. And I'm quite happy to do a little bit of a nostalgia fest for a short while. I don't want to be talking about old books forever.
Yeah.
And I've got like a whole bunch of things in the pipeline, I think, that I'm trying to work on that I'd much rather focus on probably. Maybe when it gets to 30 years, we can have a think
Yeah.
about it.
Have this conversation again. Absolutely. And so you've got the seventh Skelf coming out this year.
Yes.
And is many more to come, or is this
I mean, it's certainly not the end.
good?
I don't see. I mean, I'm still keen to keep writing the Skelf's
Good.
books for sure. So yeah, the seventh book, Ghost Notes, is coming out in August. One of the next books that's going to be coming is a collection of short stories,
Ah,
which is a bit different for me. So it's mostly stories that have already been published in various places, collected over the years. But I'm also writing some Skelf's short stories.
oh, great.
Like quite chunky things, actually, quite big, sort of meaty short stories to go at the start. I'm having a lot of fun doing that actually because it feels like you're not restricted by the constraints of a novel form and the things about plot. You can have much more fun with it. So I'm writing that at the moment. So that's out next year. I know that for sure. And I'm thinking I've got another couple of ideas for at the moment standalone books that are kind of speculative, kind of slightly fantastical perhaps. But I think I definitely want to keep writing the Skelfs. So it might be a Skelfs book, then something else, then a Skelfs book, then something else, and we'll see how we go. At some point, I mean, it can't go on forever. But that always annoys readers because they love series, they love spending time with the
Yeah.
characters. And I get that totally, but um, it has to be, I have to still have original, fresh ideas for those characters and what they're going to do and where they're going to go for it to make sense. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to not do them if I've got better ideas that are pushing their way to the front of my mind.
I'm smiling here because I watched Misery for the first time in ages recently, and you know what happens there.
Yeah, looking for it. As long as I don't crash my car in a snowy fucking mountaintop.
So, would you ever go back and revisit any of the characters from the earlier books, or is that just, again, looking back, which you're not keen to do?
I don't know. There's a couple I have thought about. I probably not though. I mean, there's so many ideas that are kind of fresh new characters and fresh new scenarios. I did wonder about Gone Again, maybe about the father and son in that
Yeah,
once the son's grown.
yeah,
That is a possibility. So that's kind of in the back of my mind. The other one was Breakers. I think
mm,
Breakers would be a nice one to revisit after a bit of time
yeah,
to see how they turned out. But again, and that's just really a one-line idea at the moment.
yeah, sure.
I'd like to revisit those worlds perhaps, but it would have to be a strong story in its own right, I think, before I would even think about it.
It's really been interesting talking to you, Doug, because the word that I keep coming back to is reaction, whether it was reaction initially to the writers that had gone before and the other books that were out there, reaction to people's idea of crime novels, reaction to what you've done previously. You think, well, I don't want to do that again immediately. I mean, that's something that seems it's really important to you is to kind of always try and push yourself and probably push readers as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think I've always thought, I mean, any writer worth their salt is doing that anyway. You're kind of pushing yourself all the time to try and write something new, something different. And certainly a couple of the ideas that I'm kind of thinking about writing next are are very boundary pushing. I mean, I've talked about one of them to a bunch of other writers, and like, as soon as I finished talking about the pitch, they were like, "Jesus Christ, you need to fucking write that. That's crazy." But it's great. I love that. I love the idea of like, I mean, I'm never going to write a vicar solving crimes in the vicarage. That's not my game.
Yeah.
I mean, that's great for people who want to read and write those things. But I just and I the thing is, I don't think of these ideas as weird. Like when I start thinking about a book, in my mind, it's like the most obvious, massive Steven Spielberg level like hit of all time. And then I'll spend a bit of time working on it and I'll mention it to my agent and he'll be like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Telepathic octopuses from Saturn. What are you on about?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, it's going to be massive." And he's like, "Okay." So I just think that I don't, that's the kind of mind I have, is that I don't really have a very mainstream mindset. I don't understand what sells, for example, and I'm not very interested in it. I'm only interested in the stories that I want to write. So, I mean, that seems to have done me all right for 20 years. So, I'm not going to start changing that now.
And I think as well, it's great that in Orenda and Karen, you've got someone who isn't put off by, telepathic octopuses. Or we're going to do a series and it's going to run over a long period of time.
Yeah, yeah. No, she's great. It's very, I think it makes a big difference having a very supportive publisher, who is just, interested in what you want to write about. I remember that she did expressed some reservations before, like with The Space Between Us, the first of the Sullivan's books, because they had never done
Yeah.
full-on sci-fi before. I mean, I think Orenda have written now, they published now quite a few speculative
Yeah.
crime novels, but this was something else. But I think that it was more to do with Orenda's own experience of the market, the genre, that sort of thing, than anything else. There wasn't any doubt about the writing, I think, from her, which was great. So I just, yeah, I mean, that sort of thing is great. I feel like I have free reign, and I feel like it's weird to say after 20 years, but I feel like I'm just getting started. I feel like I've so much more that I want to write about, like so many ideas that I want to, like books that I want to put together and want people to read. So I just think, it just feels like just getting going, just a little baby.
Doug, it's always great to talk to you. You were one of our first guests on the podcast way back in March 2012 was when
Wow.
when we came through to, it's one of our most memorable ones because myself and Ian came through to talk to you in Portobello in the Porty, and two dogs ended up having a fight in the middle of it, which we had to cut out the podcast.
Oh man, it's a shame you don't have video of that. Imagine looking at our faces from
That was,
2012.
oh, I know. Well, maybe not. Yeah, that would have been good. But yeah, it's always a pleasure. Here's to the next 20 years and all the very best.
Thanks very much, Ali. Cheers.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.